Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Carly Busch, a PhD student at Arizona State University in the Cooper and the Brunel Biology Education Research Labs. And I'm really excited to talk to you today about our recent research examining the extent to which students benefit from an instructor revealing her LGBTQ identity in a large enrollment biology course. LGBTQ is an umbrella term that stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer. And I'm going to be using it to include any individual that does not identify as straight or cisgender. And I want to begin today by talking about what we already know about the experiences of LGBTQ individuals in STEM. First, STEM fields have been prone to a lack of tolerance and acceptance of the LGBTQ community. Consequently, LGBTQ employees report more negative experiences in STEM fields than non-STEM fields. But what about LGBTQ undergraduates? Well, we know that they are less likely to persist in STEM majors compared to their straight and cis peers. The unwelcoming and unfriendly nature of academic STEM has been hypothesized to contribute to this problem. And increasing the visibility of LGBTQ scientists likely plays an important role in creating more inclusive academic STEM environments. But this is challenging because LGBTQ identities are concealable. So increasing the visibility of LGBTQ scientists is more complicated than just getting LGBTQ instructors into the classroom. Further, LGBTQ identities are considered concealable, stigmatized identities. So individuals need to come out for others to know that they identify this way, and they face potential stigma from doing so. We use the theoretical framework of concealable, stigmatized identities to inform this work. And this framework is further corroborated by work we've done in our labs. Previous interview studies from our research group have shown that instructors and students worry that coming out in class might be perceived as inappropriate and negatively impact students and the instructor. However, both students and instructors highlight an array of benefits for students from instructors coming out in class. Recognizing these benefits for students is the primary driver for whether or not instructors come out to their classes. And students say it would fundamentally change how they feel in science, but they know few instructors who have actually come out. How an instructor coming out affects students has not been systematically studied. So we examined the impact of instructors coming out on all students and to what extent students think it's appropriate. We were curious to explore whether these outcomes differed by student identities. And we focused on LGBTQ identities, gender, religion, race, ethnicity, and mental health. And we chose these identities because some face stigma in academic STEM, particularly in academic biology. And there's some evidence to suggest that marginalized groups feel greater empathy towards each other. And the instructor coming out might act as a way to challenge the unwelcoming environment individuals with these identities often experience in STEM. Some of these identities are also concealable, stigmatized identities. So they may further relate to the instructor because they face the same challenges associated with having a CSI. Other identities reflect identifying with a group that has historically or even currently held anti-LGBTQ views. But it is important to remember that not every person who identifies this way has these views. So how do we address these questions? An LGBTQ instructor agreed to come out to her class at the beginning of the semester in her upper level large enrollment biology course. We collected data over 2 terms to maximize the number of students enrolled in the study. One semester was in person in fall 2019, the other online in fall 2020. The content and the instructors were the same between the 2 semesters. Because stigma is contextually determined, it's important to note that this study was conducted at a research-intensive institution in Arizona. Based on reports from Princeton Review, the institution is not considered particularly LGBTQ friendly or unfriendly. So this should give you a sense for how the institution where this study was conducted compares to your institution. Now here's an overarching depiction of our study design. At the beginning of the semester, the instructor revealed her LGBTQ identity, but how did she do it? Well, at the beginning of class, in both the online and in-person terms, she used this introductory slide, where she emphasized her hobbies, her favorite food, her favorite movies, and that she's a proud member of the LGBTQ community. This only took 3 seconds, and she never mentioned her LGBTQ identity again in her 8 weeks of teaching. We then surveyed students to see if they remembered their instructor coming out. And if so, they answered survey questions pertaining to our outcomes of interest. So who are the students who completed the survey? Across both semesters, we had 475 participants, 15% of whom identify as LGBTQ. Our first research question was, do students even remember the instructor coming out? And we found that most students did. 91% of all students remembered their instructor coming out in class. We then asked these students how their instructor coming out affected their overall experience in the course. They could choose from very negative to very positive, with the option to select no impact. Students were then asked to explain their reasoning, and we coded their open-ended responses. 2 raters achieved an acceptable inter-rater reliability, and 1 coded to completion. So what did we find? Well, here's how all students responded. 2/3 said that the instructor coming out positively impacted their overall experience in the course. Now, before I show you the common themes that emerge, I want you to get the chat open and ready to make a prediction. What reasons do you think students said that the instructor coming out had a positive impact on their course experience? And you can start putting those predictions into the chat now. Great, yep, keep those coming in. Maybe the instructor seemed more open. Maybe it helped get to know the instructor, made them more relatable, made them feel more connected or better represented. These are all really interesting ideas. Yeah, maybe it showed honesty, made it seem truthful. Great, thanks. So let's compare what you all are thinking to what we actually found. The main reason students said was that it made the instructor more relatable, more human, as a lot of students said. They also said that it helped to foster an inclusive and welcoming class environment, that it helped to normalize LGBTQ identities, and some commented on how rare it was that none of their instructors had come out in class before. About 1/3 of students said the instructor coming out had no impact on their course experience. The most common reason was they said that it just didn't change how the instructor taught or their ability to learn. Some students commented that they just don't judge people based on their LGBTQ identities. And some noted that it didn't affect them personally, but recognized that it probably benefited other students in the course. So students who said the instructor coming out had no impact on their course experience are really not bothered one way or another about it, and generally did not think the instructor's LGBTQ identity was particularly notable. Only 3% of students said the instructor coming out had a negative impact on their course experience. This equates to 7 students and only 2 provided open-ended responses. 1 said it made them feel uncomfortable, and the other student said it distracted from course material. Now, we were also curious to know how the instructor coming out affected particular outcomes, including students' likelihood of approaching her, how connected they felt to the instructor, their confidence to pursue a science career, their sense of belonging in the course, and their sense of belonging in the scientific community. We then conducted linear regressions to test whether students' identities influenced the extent to which the instructor coming out affected them. And as a reminder, we included LGBTQ status, gender, religion, race, ethnicity, history of anxiety or depression, and semester of enrollment in our models. So what did we find? Well, we found that overall, 71% of all students agree that the instructor coming out made them more likely to approach her for mentorship. 77% agreed that it made them feel more connected to her. 53% agreed that it made them more confident to pursue a career in science. 64% agreed that it made them feel a greater sense of belonging in the course, and 57% agreed it made them feel a greater sense of belonging in the scientific community. So at least half of all students agreed that the instructor coming out increased these particular outcomes. Now, to determine if certain groups were disproportionately benefiting, we used linear regression. But before I show you the results, I want you to make another prediction in the chat. Which 2 groups of students do you think will benefit most from the instructor revealing her LGBTQ identity? You can start getting your 2 guesses into the chat now. I'm seeing lots of LGBTQ folks, maybe women. Yep, maybe racial minorities. Yep, maybe students with a history of anxiety or depression. Yes, many more votes for LGBTQ, maybe religious minorities. Lots of people thinking maybe students with a history of anxiety or depression. Great, thank you for contributing your predictions. And now let's see how your predictions compare to what we found. I'm going to show you these results in a forest plot. And so to read these plots, each point is the coefficient or beta from that linear regression. And from that is the estimated 95% confidence interval. So if that confidence interval does not cross this vertical dashed line at x equals 0, then that means it is statistically significant. So here are the forest plots for all 5 outcomes, and we're going to walk through them together to look for trends. First, looking at LGBTQ students, we see that they've benefited disproportionately across all 5 outcomes compared to non-LGBTQ students. Women report a disproportionate benefit in their confidence in pursuing a science career and both measures of sense of belonging compared to men. And we see Christian students are actually less likely to say that they've benefited from the instructor coming out for 4 of our 5 outcomes compared to students who are not religious. There are no notable trends for Muslim students, students of other religions, based on race or ethnicity, or history of anxiety or depression. Now, considering that some groups of students reported disproportionately positive effects, we are curious to look at their comparison groups to see if they're reporting that they didn't benefit at all or just didn't benefit as much. And what we found was that the majority of non-LGBTQ students agreed the instructor coming out increased 4 of the 5 outcomes. For men, we saw that the majority agreed that the instructor coming out increased 3 of their 5 outcomes, and we see that same pattern for Christian students. So although some groups benefited disproportionately, students outside of those groups still largely found the instructor coming out to be beneficial for them. Finally, given the concern that LGBTQ students and instructors have expressed that coming out might be perceived as inappropriate, we asked students to what extent they agreed that it is completely appropriate for STEM instructors to reveal that they are a member of the LGBTQ community. We again asked them to explain their reasoning and coded their open-ended responses. All right, I'm gonna ask you to make one more prediction in the chat. What % of students do you think thought it would be appropriate for a STEM instructor to come out in class? All right, I'm seeing 50% up to 80%, a lot of about 70. Yeah, a lot of, I think 75 is, if I could do math really fast in my head on the spot, I would probably say the average is 75. Great, so let's see how your predictions compared to what we found. We found students overwhelmingly thought it would be appropriate for a STEM instructor to come out in class. 95% of all students said that it would be appropriate. And when we asked them why, they said that it would help to empower the LGBTQ community, that it would be a really good way to get to know the instructor. And they also said that it would be that the LGBTQ identity is an important part of who the instructor is, and so it would be appropriate for them to share. So in sum, from the study, we found that a short intervention of less than 3 seconds can have a widespread positive impact, regardless of students' LGBTQ identities, and particularly for how approachable they found the instructor, how connected they felt to her, and their sense of belonging. Encouragingly, in the context of this class in Arizona, it was great to see that students overwhelmingly thought it was appropriate for a STEM instructor to reveal their LGBTQ identity in class. And we acknowledge that this study was done with one instructor at one institution, which limits the generalizability of these findings. But we're really excited that we just received funding from NSF to study this at a national level. So if you're wondering how this study would work at your institution, you can stay tuned. I also want to acknowledge that we know coming out to students is a very personal decision influenced by many factors. And we're not saying that every LGBTQ individual should come out to their students. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, I'm not part of the LGBTQ community, so what can I take away from this study? And it provides evidence that revealing a concealable stigmatized identity can impact students with underrepresented or marginalized identities, even if they're different from yours. And we look forward to studying this specifically in future work. Additionally, everyone can use this essay written by SABER's own LGBTQ SIG as a result of the last in-person SABER meeting in 2019. And although the set of recommendations is written for an audience of biologists, it's really applicable to STEM more broadly. With that, I would like to thank my mentors, Drs. Katie Cooper and Sarah Burnell, as well as Kay Sapria for her work on this project. And as I mentioned, since this was only in the context of one instructor at one institution, we were recently awarded an NSF grant to study this at scale. So if you're an LGBTQ instructor, faculty member, or graduate student and are interested in learning more or potentially being involved in future work, you can use that QR code to access a forum and we'll be in touch. Here's the information for the other studies I referenced throughout the talk, and I'm happy to take your questions. And I will drop those links in the chat as well.
We have a question from Stephanie. Do you imagine there may be differences in an introductory level biology class?
I think that for sure there might be, because by this time students got to this upper level course, they've already persisted, right? They've already gotten through an intro level bio course. So I think doing this intervention in an intro bio course might have even more far reaching effects and impact even more students who maybe don't feel that they belong and so leave sort of earlier in their course series.
Thank you. And Roshni has a second or different question here. Are there studies on the impact of other CSIs on students? Trying to get a sense of the possibilities.
There, I believe, is somewhere talking in terms of sharing your religious identity to help students sort of bridge the gap of any potential conflict that they might perceive between religion and science. But as I mentioned, that's something that I'm definitely interested in pursuing further, looking at other concealable stigmatized identities and how revealing those affects students.
Thank you. And Jen is wondering about unconscious bias from students. Do you have a comparison of course evaluations from students from this semester versus a semester where the instructor didn't come out?
So I think we didn't look at course evaluations sort of at all. And I think that this is probably something we could do retroactively and look at how the course evaluations may be different. But that's something that we're really excited about with this national survey that or study that we're going to do when we scale this up, to have sort of a quasi-experimental design where we have instructors not come out in one semester and then come out in another semester, so that we can sort of better triangulate the cause of any increase or benefit to students that we find.
Thank you. One last question here. Colin's wondering if you think the result with women was because the instructor was a woman.
I think that it could be. I think also women often face an unwelcoming environment in STEM. And so, like I said, right, an instructor coming out could just be a way to say like, hey, like there are other identities represented as scientists as well. But again, I think that will be a strength of doing this at scale with instructors who have many different identities, revealing their LGBTQ identity to their students.
Great. Oh, great. Thank you again, Carly.